Okay, still continuing with the same process, but there's going to be just a few things different here than what you saw on those last examples, okay? Uh, First of all, you have a negative. Of course, that would just be the same thing as having a negative 1 in front of your pi over 6, okay? So like you could look at it, that way, okay? So we see pi over 6. Of course, we know that that's 30. And you're going to multiply that times negative 1, which I know you could do that in your head, but you're going to end up with negative 30 degrees, okay? Now, negative 30 degrees is going to be in the 4th quadrant if you were to draw that in standard position, okay? But now let's talk about reference angle. This is where sometimes I see students mess up, because what you've got to remember about reference angle is the reference angle is always positive, okay? So your reference angle, just as I had pointed out on those previous problems, is just this pi over 6, okay? Does not include the negative. Reference angle is always positive. Of course, pi over 6, as we've said, is the same thing as 30 degrees. All right, so when you go to rewrite this, you replace your angle with your reference angle, which is just positive pi over 6 for the reference angle, okay? Now we are in the 4th quadrant. Cosine is going to be positive in the 4th quadrant. Okay, so that just means that our value here will be positive. This just comes straight off of your table because this is just simply cosine 30 degrees. And cosine 30 degrees is going to be square root 3 over 2. Okay? So having a negative here, don't let that throw you. That's just a negative 1 in front of the pi, which is the same concept as what you saw like on these previous examples. You got a 2 in front here. You've got a 5 in front here. It's just on this one you've got a negative 1 in front. So go through and use that negative 1 just like what we did with the other problems. Okay, next one. Main thing here that's a little bit different is having the number in front. It's just like a coefficient, okay? I left a little more space in there when I wrote it than I probably should have, but you having the number in front of your trig function, that's just understood multiplication, okay? So that just means over here, then I'm just going to have 3 times sine, and I've got to figure out my reference angle to put here, and I've got to decide if this is going to be positive or negative, okay? So the 3 is going to come into play in just a little bit. It's not actually going to do anything just yet. Okay, so I see that I have pi over 3 here, which is 60. So I'm going to do 8 times 60. Of course, 8 times 60 is 480 degrees. Okay, so that one you might need to kind of do a little bit of figuring on to know what quadrant, or if you feel like you need to draw it off, you can, but 480 degrees is going to end up being in the 2nd quadrant, okay? Now your reference angle, of course, is the pi over 3, of course, which is the same thing as 60, okay? So I'm going to replace my 8 pi over 3 with my reference angle, which is, again, just pi over 3, okay? Now, again, I figured out that I'm in the 2nd quadrant. My trig function is sine, which means this is just going to stay a positive 3, okay? If you need to put a negative sign in front, then you just treat that as if it were a negative 3. So now what I have at this point is I'm going to have 3 times. Now, this just comes off of your table, okay? So what is the value for sine of 60 degrees? And sine 60 degrees is square root 3 over 2. Of course, this 3 is understood to be over 1, so you multiply across the top and you multiply across the bottom. So 3 square root 3 over 2 ends up being your final answer for that one. Now, these next few problems that I have are going to be different because they're not going to have a reference angle, okay? If you look back at all the problems that I've already done, your reference angle was always 30, 45, or 60. These are all going to be quadrantal angles. And if you remember, that's like your 90, your 180, 270, 360. Of course, it could be negative 90, negative 180. You know, quadrantal are those angles that stop on one of your axes, okay? So first of all, recall for this example that pi over 2 is the same thing as 90 degrees. This is just simply asking what is cosine 90 degrees. Cosine 90 degrees is one of those values that's in your table, okay? So because that is straight in your table, all you got to do to get your answer there is just go back to memory, what you've learned on your table. And cosine 90 degrees is going to actually give you 0, okay? Straight off the table. Okay? All right, let's look at this one. Now, this one's a little bit different. Of course, what you have here is pi, and pi is the same thing as 180 degrees. Now, 180 degrees was not included on your table, okay? So we're going to have to get our answer in a different way. There's more than one way to do this, but I'm just going to go back to a concept that you learned on the first test, and that's using X, Y, and R, okay? So what I want you to recall, of course, if you look at this in standard position, 180 degrees terminates here at the negative end of your x-axis, okay? Now from there, what we're going to do is we're going to pick a point on the terminal side. Okay, so if this is a point, then that point could possibly be the point -1, 0, or it could be -2, 0, or -3, 0, okay? So if we're talking about X, Y, and R, I know that my X value from my point is -1, my Y value from my point is 0, and now what you've got to do is come up with R. Now you can do Pythagorean theorem, but if you remember the definition, it's really quick and easy to do this. It's the distance from the origin to the point. Well, that distance right there would just have to be a distance of 1, okay? So now, come back up here. Let me just finish this over here where I've got a little bit more room. Since we're talking about X, Y, and R, you need to remember that sine is Y over R. And I know that Y is 0, R is 1, and 0 divided by 1 is 0. So there is your answer for sine of pi, okay? Like I said, if it's on your table, of course your table as far as quadrantal only included 0 degrees and 90 degrees. But you can see here with 180, you're just going to have to fall back to X, Y, and R. All right, let's do one more similar to that one. All right, so I have tangent of 3 pi over 2. Now, 3 pi over 2 is on the list of angles that I told you that you just need to know. This is the same thing as 270 degrees, okay? See, if you were to draw 270 off, of course, you'd have to rotate through first quadrant, second, and third quadrant, and this would be where you would terminate. That would be 270 degrees. Okay, so just like a while ago, I want you to pick a point on the terminal side. So that could be the point 0, -1. Okay, so X is 0, Y is -1, and again, R would be 1, the distance from the origin to the point. Okay, so if you pick the point 0, -2, then your distance is 2. If you're letting this be -2, okay? So now recall that tangent is y over x. Y is -1. X is actually 0. That's undefined. Now you can't divide by 0, okay? So that one would be undefined.